Welcome back, everyone, to Seaweed Brain, a Percy Jackson podcast. Today, we are actually embarking on a new journey. We have...
Seaweed Brain, a Kane Chronicles podcast!
Yeah! It is time, finally, for us to pivot over to the Kane Chronicles and discuss the, I would say, like, cult classic Rick Riordan books about Egyptian mythology, about siblings, about magic, about archetypes that reinvent themselves and replay patterns across generations through human existence. So stick around.
Look, Bumble knows you're exhausted by dating. All the must not take yourself too seriously and 6'1" since that matters. And what do I even say other than hey? Well, that's why they're introducing an all-new Bumble. With exciting features to make compatibility easier, starting the chat better, and dating safer. They've changed, so you don't have to. Download the new Bumble now.
Your brain needs support, and new Ollie Brainy Chews are a delightful way to take care of your cognitive health. Made with scientifically backed ingredients like Thai ginger, L-theanine, and caffeine, Brainy Chews support healthy brain function and help you find your focus, stay chill, or get energized. Be kind to your mind and get these nootropic chews at ollie.com. That's OLLY.com. These statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease.
Yes. So for those of you who maybe joined us relatively recently, maybe with the Percy Jackson TV show, before that, we spent like 3.5 years roughly going through all of Rick's books about Greco-Roman mythology. And also we did Magnus Chase, 3 books about Norse mythology, because those chronologically were released roughly at the same time as the Trials of Apollo, which we also covered. And also because there is I would say, stronger lore character background overlap between Magnus Chase and the Percy Jackson broad book landscape, because like, as you might guess from the last name, if you haven't read the books or listened to those episodes, Magnus is cousins with Annabeth. And Percy and Annabeth, I believe, oh god, wow, it's been like a minute. Percy and Annabeth, I think, appear at the beginning of the 3rd book, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And are like mentioned in various places throughout those books. There's like a big section in book 3 where Magnus basically is like, I have a stronger appreciation for what the end of the world means because Sally Jackson is having a child. Mm-hmm. And so there's stakes.
But as many of our listeners have pointed out to us over the last several years, there is a crossover between Percy and the characters of Kane Chronicles in the short story collection, Demigods and Magicians. So we have been in a long, roundabout, circular way trying to achieve touching upon not only all of the Percy and Annabeth content within Rick's books, but also just generally all of Rick's books centering around different world mythologies. And now we are finally at the Red Pyramid. Cheers to the Red Pyramid.
Yeah, it's a very exciting place to be. We
should introduce ourselves.
We should probably introduce ourselves. Yeah. I'm Carter. I'm one of the co-hosts of the podcast. And today it's just me and Erica, the other co-host and executive producer.
Okay, let's go with that. EP and co-host of Seaweed Brain. Today, our goal is to do a bunch of extensive setup for the Red Pyramid. This is exciting because we have some time. Not that we didn't have time in the past, but we really have some time to kill between seasons of Percy Jackson. And we're trying to, use our time wisely. But we thought it'd be fun to sort of talk about the Kane Chronicles, as it is, as you mentioned, Carter, the cult classic Riordan series, although kind of Magnus Chase's as well. But Kane Chronicles being like almost exactly 14 years old now from the publication date of the Red Pyramid. It is older and like not as many fans have read it. And I think the newer fans who are maybe getting into Percy Jackson now probably will not be reading it in as great numbers as they will be reading, the original books, maybe even Magnus Chase, since those came out more recently. So we're going to do a little historical lesson on the Kane Chronicles today.
And, of course, a lot of people don't need this. Like when we say that the Kane Chronicles books were less discussed than the Percy Jackson books, to be clear, they were very successful. Many people read them. And I think that the specific reputation that they have cult classic is perhaps underselling the commercial success that they have. But I think what I'm trying to get at is that a lot of people who are, say, avid consumers of middle grade fiction that I've talked to in my life, say like relatives who are elementary school teachers, for instance, when I have brought this podcast up to them, one of the first things they will say is, "Oh, have you talked about the Kane Chronicles yet?" Because those are the real stealth, underrated MVPs.
Sleeper hits.
Sleeper hits. Yeah. Yeah, they're very beloved. Like my aunt specifically has like brought these up to me and been like, like those are actually like if you're talking about like self-contained 3 books you want to recommend to like a 5th grader that are like perfect middle grade fiction. For her, she's like, it's the Kane Chronicles. I think for my sister also, maybe partially because of the chronology and they came out in like 2010. These are her, I think, favorite Rick Riordan books.
Oh my gosh, Nikki's return to the podcast. Nikki's return.
Maybe. Yeah. So the plan logistically is for us to go through some subset of the Kane Chronicles books in between seasons of the show, as we also, I think, continue to probably do some other interviews, other content about the TV show. We're going to, as Rick did, as the Kane Chronicles are coming out, perhaps intermingle content in these multiple streams.
Yeah. We also have The Wrath of the Triple Goddess coming out. So at a certain point, we'll have to take a break from Kane Chronicles to talk about The Wrath of the Triple Goddess. And before season 2, which is probably at the very minimum, y'all, 2 calendar years away, we will be doing our season 2 predictions as we go through and write our own 8 episodes of season 2 before the actual episodes premiere. So that's sort of what's on the horizon. And we're probably going to go through these like 2 chapters at a time, we're thinking, which is like really slow for us. So that'll be fun. Yeah. But that's also partially because we're trying to make the episode shorter, because although I am very gung-ho as a producer of this podcast about doing like monthly, like 2-hour long episodes, as opposed to weekly half-an-hour episodes, everyone I've spoken to says that we must satisfy the algorithm by continuing to do weekly episodes every week until we die. So that's what we'll be doing. Slightly less content, slightly shorter episodes, but more episodes overall is the plan.
Yes. Is it time for us to thank some patrons?
Much, much overdue patron thanking. So we have to thank our sustaining patrons, Izzy, James, Justin, Dayton, and our new sustaining patron, Olympus Weekly. Thank you so much for your support of the podcast. And then our new patrons, Lauren, Samantha, Kaylee, Jennifer, Yara, Aubrey, Damon, Sarah, Melissa, Olivia, Gari, and Kiana. I'm sorry if I mispronounced any of your names. Thank you so much for supporting us. Patreon.com/seaweedbrain, monthly special episodes. You should join the club.
Thank you so much, everyone. There was content on Patreon. We are continuing to add to that as well.
Yeah, we have special episodes on non-Percy Jackson related content. We release our main episode outlines there if you're a certain Patreon tier. We also sometimes will put like videos from the podcast episode on Patreon that aren't publicly available. So there's lots of fun stuff there if you want to come and support the show. Thank you all for supporting who are part of our Patreon. Coolest club ever. All right.
Okay.
I think this means we should set up our background with Kane Chronicles / Egyptian mythology. Carter, I know you care about the Kane Chronicles and that you know many things. Tell us about that.
I do. I care about the Kane Chronicles. As they were coming out, I was definitely seated to set up some historical context that we're going to maybe talk about more shortly. We were basically trading off 1-for-1 between the Kane Chronicles and the Heroes of Olympus series for 3 years, because there's 3 Kane Chronicles books. And the tone just felt so different because these kids are a little bit older, and I guess Sadie's actually the same age as Percy and Annabeth were at the beginning of The Lightning Thief, but her energy is much more rambunctious, is much more grown. I think that there's something about these books that really feels a lot different from the original series in a way that I think is able to achieve a lot of the things that made the original series special. There is a lot of good, productive juxtaposition between, modernity and like relatable young kid content against these traditions and ideas about like magic and divinity and power and history that is productive. But then also there's a lot of romance that works very differently from the original series. We'll talk about this. There's so much about family in these books that works very differently from the original book series. And for me, that was one of the things that I really enjoyed reading this the first time, was that I feel like my sibling relationship was not mirrored perfectly, but there was like heavy overlap between Carter and Sadie and me and my younger sister. So
Carter and Sadie v. Carter and Nikki.
Yeah. It's true. And of course, Egyptian mythology is, as Rick said, I think when he was releasing these books and gearing up to release these, Egyptian mythology is very rich, very interesting. There are a lot of resources for it. And so it was something that I feel like I knew a fair amount about, to the extent that any elementary school kid knows a fair amount about anything. It was exciting. It was good history and lore and cultural content to dive into.
Was there like a Delaire's version for Egyptian mythology?
There was not a Delaire's. Wow, this is a very specific thing that is gonna date me and sound strange, but there was a set of sort of like extended pop-up book things that they sold at Costco and Barnes and Noble that were all of these things ending with ology. Does this ring any bells for you? They had one called Egyptology, so. They had one called Dragonology, they had one called Wizardology, and they were basically like very interactive. The idea was that you were like paging through a field notebook from somebody doing like a global cross-cultural study of these different things. So it would be a book that was all about dragons from different cultures, and then you would have like pelts and feathers and like field notebooks from observing their like footprints and stuff. There was an equivalent thing for like wizards, as I said. And so Egyptology, they like released similar things where you would get like hieroglyphics for you to translate that were in the book, and there would be pieces of papyrus that you would feel and could pull out of the books. I don't know if I should say this on the air. This is a type of book that you probably should not be selling at Costco, because a little kid can reach in there and grab some of those bonus materials and exit the store with them without purchasing the book.
Oh, we're talking about stealing on the podcast again? I think that's fine.
Mind you, like, it's not stealing a book, but I just feel bad because it is possible that like some little kid was not, vetting their copy of the book when they were at the YPO Costco, and they walked out with one that was missing a particular translation guide.
Oh, you were the victim. You weren't the robber.
No. I was the robber, and I was also the one who checked it. Eventually, I did. Wow, this is really getting into the weeds. But me and my family, like, our like elementary school era thing was that we would go to the book section immediately upon entering the Costco, grab some books, and then go sit on the furniture that was on display in the Costco and wait there and read until our parents were done grocery shopping. And then we put the books back, except for like once a year, we'd be like, actually, this book, it's crossed the threshold. I reread this 5 times. This is going to come home. And so at that point, I like really checked it. When I was sitting there on those display couches being like, okay, this piece of virus in, this field note present. And so I verified for my copy that we were all good. The book is still probably in my childhood home at this point. Among other resources, Egyptian mythology is something where there are a lot of good resources for kids, even though there's nothing that comes to mind that I think would be a good one-to-one to Delaire's Greek mythology.
Mm-hmm.
What was your background? You had not completed the series.
No,
in your
I think I've
youth,
lied
right?
many times about whether or not what the truth is. I think I've lied on the internet and in person to people. I only ever read The Red Pyramid. I did not finish the series. That's the truth. That's the full, complete truth. I have all 3 hardcovers because at some point in like 2021 or something, I was like relentlessly visiting my local used bookstore trying to find like hardcover copies of the rest of the Kane Chronicles, and also like the ones I was missing from Heroes of Olympus and stuff. And I found them, so I bought them. So I have the complete original book set that makes it look like I did read all of them when they first came out, but I didn't. I only read The Red Pyramid. I don't know why. I think I just got distracted with Heroes of Olympus. I remember really liking it. So I'm really excited to go back and read all of them through. I read chapter 1 just now and it's great. I'm excited. But I don't know that much about ancient Egypt and Egyptian mythology. But in the same way that I learned a lot about ancient Greek culture in our research for season 1 and beyond of our podcast, I think it'll be fun to kind of do some other like extraneous mythological reading and like cultural reading on the more historical context of these books.
Yeah.
More context to go into the Kane Chronicles. Many of y'all have probably heard that Netflix did pick up the rights for a period of time to potentially do film adaptations of the Kane Chronicles. This was in development for a while, and currently the project is in turnaround, which means that Netflix sort of like relinquished their hold on it, and essentially now the rights are back with Mythomagic. That's Rick and Becky's production company for adapting all of Rick's works to TV and film. And so what they can now do is sort of shop around the Kane Chronicles to other production houses. This means essentially that Disney Plus has the ability to pick up the Kane Chronicles, thus setting us on the journey of the Riordanverse of madness. I'm saying they have the possibility. They have not yet, however, they should. So anyone here listening from Disney, you absolutely should pick up the Kane Chronicles. And people might disagree with this. Maybe, I don't know, maybe this is a spicy take. I would rather see Disney Plus pick it up now and like let it like sit in development for a hot second while they focus on Percy Jackson, and they can eventually build out the Kane Chronicles. Just pick it up and have it ready so that we can like have it everything part of a cohesive world, because you know how complicated it gets when
the Spider-Man nightmare.
Yeah, you know, if somebody else has Kane Chronicles and then they can't be a part of the same world, that will be devastating.
The Netflix pickup, I think, was for a live action 3-film run, is my memory, right?
I think so, yeah.
I personally would love to see 3 animated films for these books. I think that Disney is a good place to do such a project.
Oh, right. Percy Jackson, historical fandom significance. As we said, The Red Pyramid came out May 4th, 2010. That is almost exactly 14 years ago from the time we're releasing this episode. Wow, we are old. For context, The Last Olympian came out on May 5th of 2009, and then The Lost Hero, October 12th, 2010. So these books alternated, continuing on like this, with Kane Chronicles coming out in May and Heroes of Olympus coming out in October for 3 years straight. Rick Riordan was on something when this was happening.
Volume.
He was on one. The volume that he was churning out at Disney Hyperion is unbelievable. Red Pyramid is also the first book in Rick's longtime collaboration that is ongoing to this day with Stephanie Lurie, editor at Disney Hyperion, who is now the editorial director of Rick Riordan Presents. That's his imprint. I know we've said this many times before on the podcast, but if you're new here, Rick Riordan Presents is an imprint over at Disney Hyperion that picks up and publishes books by authors who write about their own cultural mythologies, anything within like the speculative fiction realm that has to do with younger people, both middle grade and YA, kind of going on these fast-paced adventures. They're sort of like Rick Riordan-esque. So anybody who loves Percy Jackson or loves the Kane Chronicles or Magnus Chase would also be interested in Rick Riordan Presents books. That's sort of the concept of the imprint. Like Carter said, this book is like very different from the original Percy Jackson series from the jump. And like we said, this book came out before The Lost Hero. So this is sort of our jump into characters being like a little bit older, like from the start. Carter is 14, Sadie is 12, but they both feel a lot older than Percy and Annabeth did in The Lightning Thief.
Yeah.
And they're not demigods.
Yes. Those are both true. Sadie is 12, but she wears Doc Martens, so it's different.
She's 12, but she's cool. Yeah, we're entering a world of like magic systems. We have like not only the brand new Egyptian mythology, but we're also opening up this book in London. We're no longer in America, which is a huge departure from the original series, which is like very specifically, intentionally, and decidedly American. The gods being in New York because it's the flame of Western civilization, and we're doing this cross-country road trip every book. And I was curious because I was not, super culturally aware in 2010 of the sort of like critical conversation around this book, what some of the reviews said when this book first came out, and they were all extremely positive. Bruce Handy from the New York Times said, quote, "This time the setting is more global. After all, Riordan is no longer writing in the hegemonic Bush era, but rather in the multilateral age of Obama." That I thought was a really interesting comment. Obviously, that's one person's critical analysis of like the cultural shift between 2005 to 2010. But that's, that's interesting. Do you have thoughts on that, Carter?
Oh, wow. I love book critics. They're just very they're so interesting as people. The thing is, like, I kind of know what they mean, but also like I think that this wasn't, I don't know if I completely agree with this. And also, like, literally, like, even statements like hegemonic Bush and multilateral Obama have not necessarily aged in a sterling, like, it wasn't this person's fault. But, like, for those of you who are really closely following Obama's, like, foreign policy agenda in 2010, there was supposed to be this big pivot to Asia, and we were supposed to be moving to a different sort of world order. I don't know that entirely materialized, and I think that Obama would probably agree that didn't necessarily materialize, and mostly, in fact, did not materialize at all. But it's funny. The framing of Percy Jackson as representative of the hegemonic Bush era, I think, is also something that is genuinely fascinating.
A fascinating
that one I
lens.
follow less, I would say.
I would love if, Rick Riordan thinking about how we weren't allowed to submit, we got our questions screened, right? When we were in the press Zoom rooms with the Riordans. Imagine if we submitted a question that was like, do you feel that the original Percy Jackson series was a product of the hegemonic Bush era? We never would have been invited back. Anyway, this review went on to say, oh, what am I saying? Riordan fans, young and old, will eat this new book up. The Red Pyramid is in almost every way an improvement over its predecessors, deeper and more emotionally resonant, and with an underlying moral and philosophical semi-seriousness. Do you feel that it's more emotionally resonant, Carter?
I think that the emotional scope feels different. How would I put this? I think that the characters experience larger emotional fluctuations from moment to moment, like chapter to chapter. The journey that they go on feels like it has higher peaks and valleys. Like Percy is a little more emotionally stable. Is that the way that I want to say that? I don't think that's quite right, but like a lot of Percy's journey is dictated by these large series level progressions, whereas in the Kane Chronicles I think you really get a sense for them reacting very strongly to individual moments, individual character introductions, like the pace of big emotional changes I think is higher. I don't know that I would characterize that as being more resonant, though. I think that it gives the feeling of a more emotional book. This is a very imperfect analogy, but in the same way that a pop punk song might feel emotionally resonant in a different way than, I don't know, a Beyonce album or something, the pacing and the scope and what sorts of emotions were arising and at what intervals they're changing is different. The volume of the comparison is not something that I'm necessarily following, but I see where they're going.
Susan Carpenter at the LA Times in 2010 said, why mess with a successful formula, especially if you can use it to make your new story just as fast-paced and intriguing as its predecessor? Shelf Awareness said, for anyone who was afraid he couldn't top his Percy Jackson series or his initial title in the 39 Clues, fear no more. So again, people saying not only is it as good as the original series, it's even better.
Are we going to have to read the 39 Clues? That's one that we have not ever discussed.
You talk to me when we're waiting for the season 3 of the Disney Plus show and we've run through everything that exists. Yeah, we can do the 39 Clues. The Kirkus reviews said, readers pining for Percy Jackson will find new heroes in Carter and Sadie Kane, and that's not all bad, even if the plot will seem familiar. So there we go. That's sort of that conversation around the book as it was coming out. Again, very, very popular, very, very successful. Carter, would you like to introduce us to some of the themes present in the Kane Chronicles?
Sure. We've alluded to some of these ideas earlier in this conversation, but I think that the Kane Chronicles are much more interested in family than the Percy Jackson books, which feels weird to say because as we were reminded in the television adaptation, Greco-Roman mythology is a family story. A lot of Percy Jackson is about parentage and about appropriate relations between parents and children and what we owe to each other and how children should think about how to behave and move forward given certain parentages and their relationships with their parents. This book is, I think, about family in a way that hews more closely to, I think, common, say, American experiences of family. It is a lot about parents who are largely present in your lives. It is a lot about siblings in a way that we get very little of in the Percy Jackson book series.
Besides Nico and Bianca, rip.
There's Nico and Bianca. There's the Stoll brothers, but we're not inside the heads of any of these sibling relationships. Carter and Sadie in the Kane Chronicles have a long period in their childhood where they are not cohabitating, but I would say that there is this root of closeness in their relationship that comes from the fact that there was a point in time where they lived together and they have a lot of shared experiences. And that for a lot of people, I think is what forms a sibling relationship. It's not about necessarily, like whether or not you share genetic material. It's an idea of like being raised in the same environment, right? And they have more of that than Annabeth had with her like half siblings than Percy had with, say, Tyson. Like it's a very different relationship that we're exploring there. And the relationship that they have with their parents is very different because we're not focused on this idea of their parents simultaneously being archetypes or like benefactors of powers or figures in how we understand Western civilization. Like Carter and Sadie's parents are exceptional in some ways, but they're like talented professors who are kind of in the same profession and same like magical lineage as Carter and Sadie. They're not like a different kind of entity or being. Like they are basically like one generation back versions of Carter and Sadie in terms of the way that they relate to the world and the magic system and everything else going on. So I think that the type of family story it's telling is a little bit different and something that maps on a little more directly to what a lot of people experience in nuclear families in America and in other countries. Although the series sort of shifts that as time goes along. And I think we get to go on a journey from this nuclear family story to a story that is a little bit more of like a found family story and see that linkage and progression in a clear and interesting way, especially because let me not spoil anything actually. But we go on a journey from a more traditional family story, I think, to a less traditional family story where we're following a clear trajectory in a way that's nice.
Mm-hmm. Is this a good time to talk a little bit about the inherent difference between Greek mythology and Egyptian mythology and how that does set up an inherent difference?
It is.
You're going to have to talk about that.
So, Greek mythology and Egyptian mythology, like a lot of other mythologic pantheons, have fundamentally like a family story where there are like one or two core families and there's a lot of like siblings marrying each other. This is like cross-culturally something that is common in origin stories in general because there's an idea that there's a first and that like where the other deity is going to come from in order for you to perpetuate the family line. But also cross-culturally, I think like there were a lot of like royal lineages that engaged in practices of like marrying relatives. But Egyptian mythology differs a little bit in the sense that the core stories, I think, are more about family dynamics, or certainly have a different take on family dynamics. Like when we talk about the sort of foundational traditions of Greek mythology, we have the story of like Zeus versus Kronos, and then Zeus sort of being a sort of stable ruler figure for all of like human civilizational eras, basically, right? Whereas Egyptian mythology is much more of a story of, fundamentally, it is a story of chaos versus order. It's a story of two primordial forces being encapsulated by two different deities that are in a constant struggle forever and ever throughout time. And we see like similar sort of microcosms of that story mirrored in a lot of the other key pieces of Egyptian mythology. Like this first book is going to be a lot about the story of Osiris and Isis and Set and Horus. And that is a story, it's like the progenitor to Hamlet before Hamlet, where at a high level, we have like Osiris and Isis being the ruling couple of Egypt. Like Osiris is the pharaoh of Egypt at some point. Set, his jealous brother, is stronger than him and murders him. And eventually, like Isis is able to help Horus, her son with Osiris, to avenge his father's murder. While also Osiris then goes down to the underworld, reincarnates himself, and becomes a ruler there. So there's a way in which we see this cycle as being sort of like beneficial to society and necessary, even though there is tragedy. That like Osiris's rebirth is something that is to be celebrated and was vital to the creation of like a strong and powerful world order. And there's all the symbolism about how like Osiris, if you see him depicted in images in ancient Egyptian art and such, he's green. And the reason for that is because that's part of rebirth. Like he's meant to look like crops on the Nile after a flood. Like the cycle of rebirth is natural. And there's much more of this idea of things being cyclical, of struggles being iterated constantly through generations, and that being both inevitable and kind of beautiful and something that is worth commemorating and seeing in divinity. Whereas I think there in Greek mythology is some sort of like loose notion that at some point Zeus is probably going to be toppled, but that will be like the end of civilization and we're not going to be around to see that. It's a very different idea.
Which is why the Riordan verse of madness would be so interesting. If you get the Kane siblings to go talk to Percy and Annabeth, they would be like, yeah, we should topple Zeus.
Yes. That comparison is fruitful, and that this is going to yield different themes in the books themselves. Like in Percy Jackson, it kind of is this like civilizational question about whether or not we're going to enter a new epoch of life. Whereas in the Kane Chronicles, I think we get more of a sense of actual like intergenerational struggle. Like there's a lot of ways in which we will see Carter and Sadie embarking on the same journey, trying to finish their parents' work in a way that I think helps. It like mirrors Egyptian mythology.
Yeah. Oh, that's so cool.
It allows us to think about different themes, about like direct relationships between parents and children, continuing work, passing down trauma in between generations, and also engaging in these sort of eternal fights. Like there's some language about this in Percy Jackson when we talk about the idea of monsters and heroes and battles with like primordial forces of evil being fought generation after generation. I think that the metaphor in the Kane Chronicles is perhaps cleaner, or the allegory. I don't know exactly what word I want to use to describe the like figurative mapping that we're using here, but when we talk about the forces of evil in the Kane Chronicles, there's, I think, less of a leap you have to go through. Like in Percy Jackson, when you're talking about monsters, there's a sense in which they're all kind of individual, and we have this constant discussion about what it means to be a monster and like what humanity there is there and such. Whereas in the Kane Chronicles, I think there isn't even a conversation about evil. It's just that there are forces of chaos constantly, and that we are trying to bring order upon chaos, not because it is necessarily just, but it is because how we create life and civilization. And there's like a clear delineation of like the forces that we are working against are all actually one specific thing, and that is this force of chaos bumping up against order.
Oh wow, I'm so excited. This really is like very different territory to the Percy books, which is so interesting, thinking about all those reviews saying like, oh, like the structure is very similar with these like kids who have access to magical powers. There's like a mythology involved, but the inherent differences in those mythologies change the themes in the different series.
Yeah, I mean, like you could, it's easy to see the superficial overlap.
And now I'm thinking about Magnus Chase and like what the central themes of Magnus Chase were as they relate to Norse mythology.
I think there are actually a lot of parallels between Norse mythology and Egyptian mythology, where like Ragnarok is not exactly the same thing as the constant battle between, the Chaos Serpent and Ra, but there's overlap. There is this idea that there is some sort of like end coming, and there's like a great organizing battle that civilization is waging against entropy.
Oh, how delightful. What else do we have? These books are stated to be a transcript of audio recordings, which will be fun. As we get into them, we're alternating perspectives between Carter and Sadie, which even though we know that Percy is directly narrating his story to the audience, we never know exactly how until we get to the Chalice of the Gods. And he talks about typing it up on a word processor. This is very specific from the jump. I wonder if there was a intentionality behind that. Like, let me clarify my framing device.
And I think that Rick sticks much more closely to the framing device in these books than he does in Percy Jackson, where like by Titan's Curse, it's, it's like Parks and Rec. Like as you get more and more invested in the characters, the framing matters less and less until eventually it kind of doesn't, it's less visible as you go on. Like Percy stops using the direct address eventually.
Like Insecure as well.
Yes.
Like Insecure as well.
Wow. Yeah. She kind of does very few like mirror rap monologues by the end of that show. Yeah. But like in this book series, probably because they're shorter, the framing device appears pretty consistently throughout the whole thing, and it has a lot of texture to it. Frequently throughout the books, you will experience Carter and Sadie kind of arguing with each other as the other one is recording their section. I enjoy it.
Yeah, that really emphasizes the sibling relationship.
It emphasizes the sibling relationship. It emphasizes their individual voices. There's so much texture to it. What is that comparison I want to draw? I'm thinking of like Teen Titans or something. There's like a much stronger sense that like you are not like watching a great epic, because it's not just that they're using the framing device. The framing device involves them using second person a lot. The purpose of the framing device is to actively recruit you, as opposed to Percy sort of telling you like you don't want to do this, and here's kind of a reason why you shouldn't want this. Carter and Sadie are like, welcome to the team. Here are some stories to help you to understand what you're getting into, how you join. And there's, I don't know, I think there's a greater sense of like a raggedness, a creation, maybe because there's no Chiron or Dionysus as well, maybe. There's more of this sort of sense of a feeling of creation and rebellion and like true childhood independence.
It's a little more boxcar children.
Yes. Yeah.
No parents. Yeah. No adults whatsoever.
Very that.
On the run. Semi-orphans.
Yeah.
And the way that we don't just have one narrator, but we do have the two narrators, like you said, arguing back and forth with each other as they like physically describe one another or are getting into arguments. I feel like we just get much more well-rounded perspective on both characters because we don't have the like unreliable Percy is narrating the entire thing.
This is Rick's first time, by the way, doing this technique where he uses multiple narrators to tell the same story, because this came out right before The Lost Hero. There's definitely a few moments here and there where Sadie's use of British slang is a lot and a bit, a bit crunchy, but I mostly find it very effective. We've talked a little bit about the magic structure. I think that this is worth dealing with, is that this is a little bit downstream from how the mythology works, but Rick inserts a lot of lore that I think is not necessarily the way that Egyptian mythology is conveyed, but that is very interesting and yields a whole different way of thinking from the way that we think about Greco-Roman mythology, and also like broadly how we think about magic systems in like a lot of literature. And that sort of leads into Percy Jackson, as there's the idea of like someone who is born with a gift, and that gift is an innate part of their like physiology, and they use that gift basically by just, I don't know, like exerting effort, training, and like being successful by virtue of this innate power. And also I think there's like more of a sense that the gifts that they have are just kind of manifestations of certain parts of the natural world order. It is like inherent variation in the way that the world works, that some people are born with certain powers, and that those powers are reflections of certain aspects of society or of nature or of something like that, right? Whereas I think the Kane Chronicles, we're going to get into this more, the idea that a lot of their powers, there's an extent to which their powers are by virtue of like good birth, lucky birth, individual characteristics, but that a lot of them come from like circumstantial or temporary connections to history that they have to train for, that are individual momentary moments of like luck and preparedness coming together, that I think is very interesting. There's an idea of the gods being primordial beings that can meld with people, and that is where power comes from, that I think is also like very interesting. Everyone's thinking about Avatar: The Last Airbender these days.
Yeah.
And there's an overlap to that, but I think that the way that it's written here is different and much more challenges ideas about like individual exceptionalism, and much more leans into ideas about inevitability of certain patterns. The gods are not just like people who represent things about the world, but they are like archetypes that will enact certain stories over and over and over again until the end of time. And that you having certain powers or engaging in certain battles or experiences is a version of the gods enacting a certain battle that I think is very unique. There are like lots of versions of the eternal battle, but like specifically like some idea of like an archetype where like you are enacting a specific story that is your generation's version of a certain story, but in a fight that is like necessary, I think is like kind of unique. Yeah.
Oh, I think I feel like that's something we talked about in Percy Jackson, but more so in the Heroes of Olympus, which would make sense that is like a theme that comes into play a little bit more, because in Heroes of Olympus, it's like we're fighting the same fight we kind of fought against Zeus, but this time we're fighting it against Gaia, and obviously it's the same fight that like Zeus fought against his parents, but it's not a fight that everybody all the time is fighting. It's just the fight that the important people are fighting, which maybe is what makes it feel a little bit different. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah. Is it time to talk about race?
Yes, both Carter and Sadie are biracial. Their dad is Black, their mom is white, and it is an interracial family. Very true.
It is an interracial family. And in the first chapter, I think we will discuss this more as we read through it. Throughout the books, there is a clear characterization that like one of the siblings, Carter, like visibly presents to most people as Black, and one of the siblings, Sadie, visibly presents to most people as white, and that people don't often read them as a family, and that a lot of their experiences in life have been shaped by differences in their appearances. Do you have thoughts about this?
Carter stares at me in Wasian. No, I think we'll talk about it. I think it's just like that. I think we're right now, all we have to say is that's a theme that we're going to be coming up against, and thinking about how the siblings move through not only the real world, but the mythological world, keeping in mind how they like visibly present differently, and also how that plays into the family dynamics and the sibling dynamics. Because like we said, this is a story about family and these siblings, and this is an undeniable component of their relationship.
Yes. Is there anything else that we wanted to talk about leading into this? Should we like pitch the book to the listeners who may
You should pitch it to
not
me.
read it? I should pitch it? Wow. Yeah, I think that this book has a lot of interesting ideas about magic that are unique and will help you to think differently about exceptionalism and about order and civilization and history. I think that the romances in this book are interesting and unique and of a style that will appeal to many people's sensibilities. This is kind of a huge spoiler, but this book series has one of my personal favorite tropes that is undercharacterized because it is difficult to write into a lot of stories, which is the Spider-Man trope. I don't know if that's what there must be like an actual name for this.
You have referred to it before though as the Spider-Man trope, where like you fall in love with maybe two versions of the same person.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, we love that.
And I mean, like a running like mechanism in this book series is people being like hosts for gods. So like there's a lot of opportunity for ideas about like exploring duality of identity, of exploring like what it means to carry on a particular like mantle or legacy, like trying to find ways also like move away from places where your identity begins or ends, and like a broader idea about what you're supposed to do or how society ought to function, or like a job that you have to do in order to contribute to your society and to the people around you. Like those boundaries are things that we're going to explore in ways that are very satisfying. I think these characters are like weird in ways that are genuinely very satisfying. Like one of the things that I was worried about, I think as an elementary school student when I picked up this book, was being like, okay, Percy is like very specific and Annabeth is very specific, and it's not necessarily obvious to me that Rick is going to be good at writing different voices of people who are fundamentally very different from the energies of those characters. But I think he does a good job. I think that they're very fun and different and weird. These kids are weird in ways that are
I'm a
very
weirdo.
satisfying.
Sadie has Doc Martens and blue hair and probably pronouns, so get excited.
Yeah. I think that Sadie is really fun because she like there is the archetype that you imagine that she slots into, and she like 80% slots into it in a way that is fun and fresh, but then also has, I think, a good 20% of like genuinely surprising strangeness that I think feels very organic and right for like just a girl of that age. Somebody who's still kind of curious and still has a lot of like irregularities that haven't been like worn down by the world and that are really like fun and refreshing to see. Like moments where she is like surprisingly curious about things that you wouldn't necessarily expect her to be surprisingly curious about.
You're such an older sibling, rewarding. Carter. You're like, look at this little creature who has not yet been worn down by the world and has so many unique idiosyncrasies that I appreciate and value in her personality. Yay.
Yay.
Yay. Yeah, I think that was good. I'm also going to add, because now that I'm realizing this really is the pitch. This is us pitching to our listeners that they need to crack
to our
open.
Listeners that we're doing something cool.
Yeah, we're doing something cool. You need to crack open your dusty copy of The Red Pyramid, or like go to the library or Libby and find one and start reading with us. So you have time to read the first couple chapters between now and our next episode. I'll also add that not only are we all like, in the waiting period before season 2, but I'm certainly feeling some Percy Jackson burnout. I'm sure other people are as well. This is the perfect time to do a teeny, like not even a full pivot, but just like a box step and a kickball change into the Kane Chronicles. This is a great time.
Is that supposed to be less than a pivot?
Is a kickball I think less than a pivot is a kickball change. A box step just gets us right back to the same spot. This is like the first step in our box step back to season 2. Yeah.
I understand. Yeah.
So yeah, everybody get the Kane Chronicles, get on it. Grab your copy of The Red Pyramid. And also, since I am yet to read all 3 of these books, I doubt we'll be like doing massive spoilers as we go through these books. So if this is your first time reading them, this will probably be a safe space for that. And like, if Carter wants to spoil something, we'll like tag it going forward. So
I think we can commit, and we probably should commit to not spoiling.
I believe in you.
Certainly not spoiling more than like 2 chapters ahead, or not spoiling in a way that, I don't know.
Yeah, we'll be doing it like book club. Yeah.
We should make a commitment. No spoilers. Yeah. That's good.
The first season of our podcast, as we were rereading the books, we were thinking about it more like, oh, it's so interesting to recontextualize the story we already know. This is like book club. This is book club going through the Kane Chronicles, experiencing it and thinking about it in real time.
That's going to be good. They're good books. Genuinely. I'm very excited to revisit them.
And if anybody who's listening to this is a total ancient Egyptian mythology nerd or professional, and you have recommendations for books to kind of read alongside these books as companion pieces, or to like learn more as adult people about the history, please let us know. Send us a message, send us an email. I'll be compiling a reading list for myself over the summer, and we can all do this together. Yay. All right. I think that's all, huh?
Yeah, I think that's right.
Okay, crack open chapters 1 through 2, and we'll see y'all next time.
Bye, all.
Bye.